Okay, so this video is to talk to patients about improving their food choices. I'm going to be very not talking as much because Yolanda's the expert. What I understand about, so I want to make this how you improve your diet separate from weight loss, because I want us to have weight loss as another behavior option that patients can have. This is just about how the right food, so not quantity of foods per se, because that would be under the weight loss video, but the right types of foods and the timing of eating is important and affects diabetes. So I'll start with what I understand, and then please you take over. But we basically have, in diabetes, you have a problem with all the sugar in your blood. So knowing that, we have to choose foods that don't create a lot of sugar in the blood, especially that don't create a lot of sugar in the blood quickly. So if you eat something and it enters the blood fast, it's bad for diabetes because your body is overwhelmed with sugar. What we do with diabetes with nutrition is we find foods that don't have a lot of sugar in them, or if they do have some sugar, it takes the body some time to break it down, so it enters the bloodstream very slowly so your body can handle it. So the main types of foods are vegetables and fruit is one type. Starches and carbohydrates is another type. Protein is a third type. So the main areas where you have your sugars are in the fruits and in the carbohydrate starches. Now, there are certain foods in that carbohydrate starch group that take the body a long time to break down. And those are the ones that are less processed. So the whole grain breads take longer to break down than the white bread. So I generally think of eating as a plate of food, and I think of 3 plates a day. And you have that plate divided. Half of that plate is your fruits and vegetables. A quarter of that plate is your starches and carbohydrates, and a quarter is your protein. And so let's focus on that quarter. That quarter really should be whole grains, and so that's that. The other thing is beverages are a huge source of sugar. So regular soda, Starbucks Frappuccino is a huge, and desserts are a huge source of the sugar we put into our body. So avoid completely any drinks that have sugar in them.
Which would be good, yes. So a lot of times people will ask about, they'll say, well, I don't eat lots of fried food, so I'm baking my foods, which is good. So I always encourage people that that's a good thing. However, it does not really truly affect your diabetes. Now, it's important to make sure that they know that fats and salt are not good for them, and it's not good for your blood vessels, which the diabetes affects, but it's truly the carbohydrates that will actually affect their blood sugars. And a lot of times people will not have an idea of what carbohydrates are, so I will tell them it is anything with sugar in it. It is fruit. It is any kind of grain product, any kind of cereal, rice, barley, couscous, pasta, any kind of noodle is a carbohydrate. Milk is a carbohydrate. Potentially things that say sugar-free that are baked goods. Any kind of baked goods with like fruit in them, anything with flour in it. Those are all carbohydrates. Starchy vegetables like peas, corn, carrots, beets, dried beans are carbohydrates. So most of your diet is carbohydrates, and that's what's going to affect your blood sugars. They're not necessarily bad, like Dr. Cohen said, but they're going to affect your blood sugars. And when you have diabetes, you cannot handle large amounts of carbohydrates. As we're moving on into the summertime, then it's really important to make sure that people are understanding that fruits are carbohydrates. So here, fruits are healthy for them, and they should eat lots of fruits and add more fruits to their diet. If they go on the big old fruit fest, like, it becomes in the summertime because we have a very fleeting fruit season, you get peaches for 2 weeks, you get cherries on sale for 2 weeks, and everybody goes out and buys them. If they're eating large amounts of fruit at any one time, they're going to end up with really high blood sugars. If they're drinking sugary drinks, they need to think of those like food. Because essentially, if you're drinking sugary drinks, you have left no carbohydrates for any of your meals. A can of Coke, that's a meal. So if you would like to eat food, you could eat food, or you could have a can of Coke. But most people, I think, would opt to actually eat food. Sometimes it's helpful because a lot of people will tell you that they don't like diet pop. They don't like diet drinks. They could do water. But I will tell them to potentially try some different brands of Diet Pop because they all taste slightly different. Diet Pepsi and Diet Coke both have 2 different versions one has Splenda, one has NutraSweet in it. They do taste different. To try to buy them when they're on sale. So if you're buying, a big 2-liter bottle, which might be 99 cents as opposed to, a 12-pack that cost you $4 and you hate all of them, go with the 99-cent one because, if you don't like it, you've not spent that much money, and to try some different ones because you may find one that you like better than another. But truly, if it's a sugary drink, that is one thing that they should not have. They can potentially still have, some desserts and things in moderation. The goal is not so that people are feeling so deprived that they hate eating. Or that they're eating the same exact thing every single day, and they just truly do not enjoy it at all. It's a chore, but you want to make it, so that they can still eat food, but within, a kind of plan and a guide. And it really takes a lot. Most people who have diabetes, it's a chore. They're essentially thinking about what they're eating at every single meal, what they're thinking ahead of time. They're thinking about, well, I can't have this at a cookout or I can't have this at a holiday. So it takes a huge amount of resources to really kind of manage your diet when you have diabetes. Whole grains are really important. So, I will encourage people to have whole grains, and they may ask, well, why is this good? And, why should I eat brown rice as opposed to white rice? And essentially because it takes longer for your body to digest it. It's still a carbohydrate. It eventually will still raise your blood sugar, but it takes longer for it to do so. So that's why the whole grain things are more important, and they want to look for something that actually says whole grains on the label. So like that really squishy whole wheat bread, you might as well eat white bread. If you're going to have whole wheat bread, it needs to be that really dense, heavy kind of whole wheat bread. That would be a kind of bread that would digest a little slower, so that they could have that. And then they also need to make sure, and sometimes people will not eat. When they're not eating, your body will do some other things. So they really need to make sure they're kind of getting those 3 meals in a day. And I know it kind of sounds stupid, like, well, if I'm eating, but you told me I shouldn't eat the carbohydrates, I shouldn't eat because that's raising my blood sugar. But sometimes, depending on the patient, then truly actually getting in all those meals and potentially getting in all of their medication doses because they got their meals will help improve their blood sugars. The other thing is that they need to make sure that they are not saving up their carbohydrates. So it's not like a diet. When people go on a diet, you think, okay, I'm going to drink water all day long because I'm going to go have dinner out at the restaurant and I'm going to save all my calories for the end of the day. They can't do that because your body cannot handle all those carbohydrates at one time. It's like a bank. It's either you use it or it's gone. So you cannot save up, all your carbohydrates from breakfast and lunch so that you can have your big holiday meal. You either eat it at breakfast or it's gone. You eat it at lunch, it's gone. You cannot save them up like that. And sometimes that's what people will do, but your body just cannot handle that huge amount of carbohydrate load if you do that, because your body's not making enough insulin for that. So I think that's something that's helpful, for people to know. You can't save them up. Sometimes people will, well, I'll just save a little for dessert. If you're having something and it's right after the meal, so if you know that you left enough carbohydrates so that you could have ice cream after your meal, you didn't eat the roll, you didn't eat your rice at dinner time, and right after dinner you're going to have a dessert, that they could do, but they can't say, well, I ate less at lunchtime so I could have dessert later on. It won't work that way.
Can you talk about what a healthy breakfast, lunch, and dinner would look like for somebody with diabetes?
So if your average person, if you were getting about 3 carbohydrate servings at a meal, and let's say like 2 for a snack, so I could have, let's say, so let's use like a piece of toast. You could, let's say, have a piece of toast, a small piece of fruit, and half a glass of juice. That would be your carbohydrates there. If you had some kind of lean, like breakfast meat, or maybe you had a hard-boiled egg with that, those don't count in there because those would be proteins. And the carbohydrate part, which would truly affect the blood sugars, would be the toast, the juice, the piece of fruit. So they could swap it out like that. If you had, let's say, a cereal that had, 2 carbohydrate servings in that cereal, then, you could have that with, a glass of milk, or put a glass of milk in your cereal. If you were having, let's say, at lunchtime, maybe it's a small piece of fruit and a sandwich with 2 pieces of bread would work. If you're having salads, I usually will ask people if they're using a sugary salad dressing, because if you are, then that's going to count as your carbohydrates. If you're having, like a ranch dressing, an Italian, that won't do it. But if you're eating, like a French, a Catalina, a sweet and sour, there's carbohydrates in there, and you need to count that into that allowance. If you were having, let's say, soup, if you had like a vegetable soup, then they would need to eat some crackers or a roll or something along with it, so that you're getting those carbohydrates there. And so that, and sometimes it's hard because, what we think of as servings are not necessarily the same as a serving size in terms of carbohydrates. So like a third of a cup of rice is 1 carbohydrate serving. So if you were having dinner and let's say you had a roll and rice, you'd have to have less rice so that you could have the roll. If you didn't want the roll, you could have a whole cup of rice, along with, let's say it was baked fish or some broccoli or something like that. But you're kind of swapping out and picking and choosing those carbohydrates there. And it's always good to look at the labels. And I will always tell people, to read the labels on the cans. You want to look at the serving size. You want to ignore whatever it says on the front of the package. The front of the package always lies. You need to turn it over. And if they're eating packaged foods, most packaged foods, there is more than 1 serving size or 1 serving in that package. So even though they put it in a little foil pack, you can't reseal it, you can't reclose that can. There's truly more than 1 serving in there, so they need to make sure on the nutrition label, when they look at it, that they're adding up or totaling it, multiplying it if they're eating the whole entire thing. Most canned soup, there's more than 1 serving in there. A Pop-Tart, you rip open that little foil package, you cannot reseal that. You're not supposed to eat 2 Pop-Tarts. The serving size is 1 Pop-Tart. So if you eat 2, you have to double everything that's on that nutrition label. And that would be the same, with your fat, your salt, especially the salt, which again won't affect their diabetes, but it's really important for their blood vessels, which the diabetes affects, is to look at that nutrition label and read the salt on there, because you'll find the same type of food and across different brands will have very different amounts of salt that's in the food, so they want to look for the ones that are lower, and again, it kind of goes back to the part about the front of the label. The front of the label may tell you that it has 50% less salt than their original version, but if their original version had 4 days worth of salt, if I chop it in half, and get 50%, I still have 2 days worth of salt in there, which is still too much, for people to have. So it's always looking at the back of that label. The front will lie to you, and turn it around to the back of the can there.